Good morning. Welcome, everyone. Glad you're here.
Good morning.
We will give everyone a couple minutes here before we jump in. Morning, Kimberly.
Good morning.
I have the slides, but I'm going to make you a co-host just in case.
Okay.
And we will wait a few minutes for everyone to jump in. Morning, Pat. Good to see you.
Good to see you yesterday too.
Yeah.
Oh no, I missed you, Pat. Were you at the dam dinner?
No, another
Okay.
in the daytime.
Different function. Got it.
There's always tons.
Yeah.
Right.
So my calendar app says that we had a rain forecast for today, which it certainly seemed like it this morning. It's kind of odd.
Wouldn't that be exciting?
It was where I live. It was something. It was not just fog, but I don't know anymore.
At least we weren't in Zion with the floods.
Yeah. And I hear Texas, like Dallas, Fort Worth area too. Looks like they're having a lot of flash flooding.
A lot of feast but famine.
Yeah. Just wait one more minute here before we get started.
All right.
All right, everyone. Well, welcome. We're very grateful to be here with you. My name is Landon Rank. I'm the administrative manager for SB Act. I'm here with my colleagues, Jeff Schaefer and Catherine Soto. Jeff is not long for SB Act. His last day will be next Wednesday, the 31st. And so we do want to keep extending the invite. We're having a farewell event at the Unitarian Society on the 31st at 5:30 p.m. And I'll post the link in the chat window. Jeff, do you want to say anything?
Yeah, just I know some people can make it, some people can't. So just thank you for all of your efforts. I'm really encouraged by, we just had a call this morning talking about dignity moves related to our neighborhood navigation center and how that's both giving hope to service providers, but also a lot of people that have been on the streets for a long time. So there's so many new exciting developments, funding coming down and collaboration. So we're excited to see what's also going to come. But I just want to say thanks to everyone for working together.
And we want to encourage you, since you're all on the call now, to please introduce yourself in the chat window. And I just want to remind everyone, so this is a joint working group for housing retention between the Act on Homelessness Collaborative and the City of Santa Barbara with SB Act and the County of Santa Barbara Continuum of Care. So we're really grateful to get to share this space with all of you as we try and address solutions at a countywide level. And I want to start by kicking it over to Kayla Peterson with SB Act to share a little bit of updates about the Good Neighbor Handbook.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much, everybody, for being here and being patient with me, jumping from call to call. But it is so good to see all of you. So now what I'm going to do is share my screen, if I'm able to, Landon, to be able to show you the Good Neighbor Handbook. Many of you have had the opportunity to view it already. But before I do that, I want to just kind of acquaint everyone a little bit with the Good Neighbor Handbook if you aren't already aware about what it is. So this group worked on this brief, really approachable, really accessible document last year, in the fall of last year. And the whole purpose of the Good Neighbor Handbook is for case management organizations, case managers like CityNet or Good Sam, to sit down and work with folks and walk them through this handbook together. And the handbook brings up things that might not otherwise naturally come up in conversation, such as how to handle curfews in a maybe shared living space, or how to handle maybe roommate conflict or housemate conflict, or noise complaints, or working with a landlord, all of which some clients maybe have had different experiences approaching together and maybe don't bring up the conversation on their own already. So what the Good Neighbor Handbook is really designed for is for a case manager to sit down and tackle kind of segment by segment, section by section, walking a client through some of these things in a kind of with an external form, an external document, sort of introducing the conversation. And so what we're going to be doing is Catherine and I will be, over the next several weeks and months, sharing this document in CES case conferencing. Emily Allen, who I believe is on the call right now, has been really gracious to allow us to be able to share that. So we'll be sharing tomorrow and then next week, and then in the youth and veterans case conferencing meetings, just to walk case managers through the document and see what kind of feedback is kind of initially shared on the document. And then what we're hoping case managers are able to do is introduce the document, if they haven't already, to their kind of housing retention case management components when they're visiting their client in their new unit, and being able to sit down and say, okay, can we tackle this section together today? Who do you want to call if this issue arises? To be able to, again, drive forward those conversations that really, really matter when you're acclimating for the first time in a long time, or the first time ever, to a new unit. So what I'm going to do right now is pull up that document. If you give me just a moment, I will share my screen in just a second. Okay. So this is the Good Neighbor Handbook. As you can see, it's sort of designed to be accessible and relatable. It's not just a cold document, because we know that many folks, when they first get into their unit, are receiving a stack of paperwork. They're looking at so many things, and so many things are new to them, that this isn't just something that we want folks to have and look at one time, or in their first moment of getting to their unit, or finding their space. We want it to be a part of that ongoing case management conversation. So that's really, again, what it's designed for. And this, again, is there to introduce the aspect of the conversation that puts a little bit of the onus on the client. There are other, of course, components to housing retention that are, it takes a village type of approach. So again, just accessible. It's more about, again, being a good neighbor. There are some other components of a lease that aren't contained in here and might be part of the other documentation that the client receives. So there's different parts, noise levels, taking care of your apartment, taking care of the property, decorations, all of these things that may not come up naturally, or that a case manager, when they're running around working on all of the different pieces of the case management process with the client, might forget to bring up naturally. And so these things help you bring those up in a little bit more of a natural kind of environment. All sorts of different conversations that you might want to have with a client. Some might apply to the client, some might not. But still kind of a universal document to take your client through, regardless of what they might kind of experience. So you might do part 1, week 1 or week 2. Part 2 might come along a little bit later, however you and your clients want to work together. Noise levels, neighbor conflict, like I mentioned. And then if you need help, at the very end of the document, which we'll get to in just a moment, we've got getting to know your neighborhood, getting to know the space around you. We know many clients might be moving out of the space that they normally hung out to a different neighborhood and might need a little bit of support in figuring out what's around them. Where are the grocery stores? Where can they go pick up their mail? All of those components. Finding your local spots, finding a way to get engaged in the community, ways that kind of bring to life a little bit more of the other parts of housing retention, of finding genuine community and a way to spend time with your community. Social media for the common good, advocacy opportunities, thinking about the impacts on your space. Yeah. And then the end is the support team contacts, which I really like as a component. So the client can work with the case manager to identify who are the people when I'm having an issue that might be laid out in this document. Who can I call? Who can I reach out to? Because so much of the work that all of you do in your unique ways is supporting clients once they're housed and making yourself available, but the client's got to reach out to you and make themselves available to you on the reverse side. So this is just that opportunity for clients to be able to know who they can call and to see their community around them in this particular way. So that, in short, is the Good Neighbor Handbook. Of course, we rolled through it pretty quickly, so we didn't have time to read all of the components. So what I'd like to be able to do is, if you're interested in taking a look at the Good Neighbor Handbook and haven't already seen it, please do let me know and I can email it to you. But also, if you're working with case management, hey, I see Rachel's got a copy already waving it in the screen. I love that. Maybe I'll turn it over to you, Rachel, to share a little bit about some maybe experiences you've had with it. But if you are already using it, another thing that we'd like to begin doing with this group is going back to the Good Neighbor Handbook and talking about what works. We know that the document, it can be living, it can be refined. We know that nothing is perfect the first go around, and there might be components we missed, or there might be components that don't land well with a client. And we want to be able to go back into that document and fix those things and make it even better, because we want to kind of see this resource be useful. So Rachel, maybe I'll hand it to you in a second after I go to Rob's hand, but I see your hand is up, Rob. So go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Kayla. And I just wanted to thank your team for creating this document. You know, we include all this information in our house rules and our lease agreement. That's a bit overwhelming for a lot of our clients when they're signing the lease agreement, and a lot of it's legalese. This document, I really appreciate how you boiled it down to just common language of, you know, this is how you can succeed sort of by following these guidelines. And I just wanted to say I really appreciate the work that's been done on it.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And again, we want it to be a support to all of the stuff that's already laid out in those lease agreements. We know you're communicating it, but want to make sure that it's as accessible as possible so that it's useful as possible. So Rachel, anything to add or share there? Kind of word from the people who are using it.
Sure, and of course, I just want to piggyback off of what Rob said and say thank you, because this is so nice to have, and it is simple, and so what we're doing is we are printed them for all of the case managers, and they are being sent out with them in their caseload. And so just like our ISPs, they're kind of living documents. We're just going over a little bit at a time, not to overwhelm. Maybe one session, just talk about, the first maybe page only, and just reiterating, what it is to be a good neighbor. And it is helpful. And so, yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much. And as like a little kind of shout out to some of the Westmont interns that we've worked with, they played a large role in really pulling the information together and making it look nice and accessible and pretty, so that it's something that doesn't feel like a drag for case managers to use and doesn't feel like a drag for a client to look at, but something that's actually beautiful. So just a little bit of a shout out to those student interns for playing a really integral role in developing this document. So again, we'll be sharing it with all of you if you need it to work through it with your case management teams, and we'll be sharing it in case conferencing as well. But in a future housing retention meeting, what we'll look for is feedback from all of you on what specific sections we can work on and refine. And I'll be reaching out to some of you as well, like to Rachel, just for specific feedback from case management teams to see what else we can add, change, and shift. But that's just a little bit from us on the Good Neighbor Handbook. And with that, Landon, I'll hand it back to you.
Thanks, Kayla. And thank you and everyone who's contributed to this. I know it's been a big collaborative effort to put it together and get it disseminated. So we do have a presentation today from Kimberly Albers with the County Housing Community Development Department about housing retention progress over the last several years. I'm really excited to get to share all this with you all. So I'm going to pass it to Kimberly, and I can start sharing the slides whenever you're ready.
All right, go ahead and pull those up, Landon. So wanted to do a little bit of kind of base setting. So you'll see, we can go right to the next slide. Reintroduce my team. I think sometimes a lot of us are on these calls and just wanted everyone to have a good sense of who's who and who's doing what. And so I am the Homeless Assistance Program Manager in the Community Services Department. We oversee the continuum of care, including HMIS and the coordinated entry system, as well as administer nearly all of the dollars that come in that are, with the exception of healthcare dollars directed to homelessness. So we have Lucille Boss, Jet Black-Mertz, Emily Allen, who's on the call today. Rock Lowry was recently promoted to a housing program specialist senior, and he's administering most of our major funding sources. Miriam Moreno, David Webster is our kind of new HMIS system administrator and analyst. Sarah Brossel, and then we have Connor Johnson in Community Technology Alliance that serve with us because we have some open positions as consultants. We'll go to the next slide. So the Community Action Plan to address homelessness was adopted by the Continuum of Care in January of 2021 and by the Board of Supervisors in February of 2021. So I want to give a quick progress update. We've kind of made this chart a little easier. It used to have 2 columns and a few more measures. We've lumped those long-term subsidies or permanent subsidies that we needed along with our permanent housing units, just to make this a little bit cleaner. So it's not that the numbers necessarily gone up, but that those 2 have been consolidated. This number is actually 140 today for temporary housing beds made because Dignity Moves is open. And then we've had 398 rapid rehousing openings or slots created since the plan was adopted. Go ahead and go to the next slide. Then we also have some system level goals in the plan. And so wanted to just quickly give you kind of where we were at the year 1 mark, which now we're almost 6 months from there. But one of our system level goals was prioritizing ending and dramatically reducing homelessness for specific populations. Our veteran population has been decreasing, and our family population, at least at year 1, was decreasing. And then, but our unsheltered youth population, which one of our targets, was increasing. Increasing housing inventory, units and beds dedicated to persons experiencing homelessness. We had a 23% increase between 2021 and 2022. 518 beds came online. A lot of those were the emergency housing vouchers and West Cox Cottages opening. And then the last one, creating a culture of diversion and prevention across the homeless response system. And I think we often think, wait, we don't have any prevention going on right now because we don't have something that's very specific to homelessness prevention. But the emergency rental assistance program truly was meant to prevent evictions and homelessness. And it has served over 3,500 households with over $30 million distributed. And that was at that year one mark. So much more already now. So with that, I'm going to kind of turn to retention. And first, I want to really try and frame some of the, any questions on the community action plan update. All right, there's a 30-page document that tells you a lot of that stuff if you ever want a link that just really goes like each project. Because it's like, well, where are those 518 beds? And so the document really takes you through that. But we'll go to the next slide if there's no questions. So I also wanted to share kind of, we've been showing this now for a while. It was a pandemic tool, but was very helpful. And so wanted to show again that, you know, one of our major issues right now is inflow, that we have a far greater number here on the orange line that are presenting as homeless for the first time in our system than the blue line shows we're able to exit the system into permanent housing. And then the green line is those who are placed in permanent housing but remain in our system because they're part of continue to be part of an HMIS housing program. So this is 300 additional folks to serve, right? When you see 512 in one quarter, 512 individuals becoming homeless for the first time, and we're only able to permanently house and exit from the system 237, really big growth. All right, so making retention even that much more important. So with that, we'll go to the next slide. I know there's a lot of numbers. These were kind of the quick ones, and we'll kind of dive a little deeper into these next ones. So we look at retention in two different ways that really tell two different stories. So this is within the calendar year. So within calendar year 2019, within calendar year 2020, within calendar year 2021, the blue line shows how many people were placed in permanent housing during that, and it's not calendar year, sorry, it's the HUD fiscal year, and how many retained permanent housing, or we show that they're still enrolled in that permanent housing project or have left that project but entered another permanent housing project. And with this stat, when you're looking at that single year, we show about a 98% retention rate, which is really exceptional. And we've had some pushback on this number several times, I think some of these meetings, and we did at your request really go back and really beg providers to look at their exits, make sure that everyone who had been exited, that needed to be exited, that the exits were accurate, and to review the data so that in the hopes that we weren't misrepresenting anything. And this is still where we wound up at the end of last year. Our fiscal year for data ends on 9/30. So this is almost a year old. So this data over here, we're going to spend the rest of the time talking about returns to homelessness, kind of tells a different story. And so what this data tells us is that people who were housed 2 years before 2019 or in 2017, that 22% of them had returned to homelessness by 2019. And the good news has been that we're making progress on that number, but still remain a pretty high number, right? That 14% still feels unacceptable, right, in 2021. So that means that people that were housed in 2019, that the provider said that they were permanently housed, they went into permanent housing situation. By 2021, 14% had returned to homelessness. Do those make sense why they're different? Okay. All All right, we'll go to we're gonna now really stay in that returns to homelessness. So we'll go to the next slide. And so how do we get to that 14%? I think Landon and Catherine had great questions of like, how can we drill down on this? And so I do, especially because we have mostly providers here today, I wanted to really show how we get here, because I think part of what's going on might be a data issue, but also very much a retention issue. So here you're seeing those, the total numbers of persons that exited to a permanent housing destination from each of the type of components we offer in our continuum. So that's that looking back at 2017 fiscal year, and then how many had returned to homelessness within 180 days. So very quickly, right? It's hard after a permanent housing placement in some ways, like if it's a rental unit, right? It would be difficult almost to even get kicked out in that time. But we know that's not the only permanent destination. So we'll talk about that later. This is kind of in that 6 to 12 month mark that we show they return to homelessness. And then this is in the 13 to 24 month mark, right? So we're between 366 and 730 days. Another group fell out. So this group, these 75 people, first 3 fell out, then 3 more fell out, then 4 more fell out, for a total of 10 of the 75 returning to homelessness within the 2 years. And so you can see that in our system, exits to permanent housing are generally folks who were struggling, right? Like if it's from an El Carrillo or Pescadero Lofts, right? These usually aren't success stories when they're exiting from permanent housing. So we have a higher percentage of exits to permanent housing returning to homelessness. So that's how we get to our 14%. Any questions on this before I'm about to go a lot more numbers on the next slide? All right, we'll go ahead. So there's been a lot of talk about how do we compare to others, because that 14% kind of standing alone, it's like, you know, we can see it's improving in our system. It still feels too high. And so we have asked San Luis Obispo and Ventura County for these same charts. And so again, this is fiscal year 2021 for HUD. And so this is that same chart. So SO is street outreach, ES is emergency shelter, TS is transitional housing, and PH is permanent housing. And so what you see when you look here is that their systems are built different than ours, right? We have hundreds of people exiting emergency shelter to permanent housing, which is like a really big credit to our shelter providers. They have almost no one, right, exiting shelters into permanent housing. Almost all of their exits to permanent housing are from permanent housing programs. So I think I haven't had a chance to circle back with them to really figure out like, how is the program, it designed that this would be so different, right, than the way our system operates. So, so just that, right, because clearly these are a lot of their success stories are in permanent housing, where for us, right, a lot of times the person who's exiting a permanent supportive housing unit usually isn't a success. But regardless, then we wind up with San Luis Obispo winds up with an 8% return to homelessness, which feels quite a bit lower than ours. And then the other issue with the San Luis Obispo County data that doesn't show on this chart is that they have error rates on the exit destination of up to 80%. So very few of their exits are being represented here in the chart. So you can see lots of blanks. And then in Ventura, again, it's just so interesting, right, that of their 917 persons that were placed into 2 years prior, that 700 of them were from permanent housing placements. So I just wanted to give a little bit of, because I think it's important, is like, where are we ranking? So right now we look like we have a higher rate of returns to homelessness, but there's definitely some anomaly in how the systems operate. So one of the things I was going to suggest is that potentially a couple of us meet with Ventura and San Luis and talk about this sort of all permanent housing model and how that's actually manifesting themselves in their system. So with that, I'm going to go on and really talk about how we get here. So in order for someone to show as a return to homelessness, and this is why obviously this is mostly for our provider audiences, which I think we have, is we have to start with who is actually exiting to permanent housing. They're not a return to homelessness, right? If they didn't exit to permanent housing to start. And so what you're seeing is the long list that every single case manager has to pick from when they're in HMIS and have to choose an exit destination. And the temporary and permanent housing situations are all mixed together in the list. So this is a drop down that each provider is having to choose from when they pick when someone is leaving their program. And so I really wanted to start with this because I wanted everyone to understand how important it is that every single provider is really working on training staff to make sure we start with that accurate original exit to permanent housing. Because if they did exit to permanent housing, we want it captured. But if they didn't exit to permanent housing, we don't want it reflected either. So we want to make sure that we're picking the right piece. And I think this area right here, if you can see, I don't know, you can't see my cursor, Landon, if you kind of want to show this staying or living with family and friends. Yeah, right there. You can see that you can pick kind of temporary tenure or permanent tenure. And oftentimes we see people who chose permanent tenure, not often, but somewhat represented in the group that we just looked at is people who we thought it was a permanent placement with a family member, but they left 3 days later, right? And so that would then appear as a return to homelessness. So really wanted to emphasize at the provider level that good data on this and measuring returns to homelessness really starts with who is actually permanently housed and making sure that we're not over-representing those in our numbers. And of course, that we're also giving people the services they need to maintain in housing. So lots of data stuff. The good strategies are coming if you'll hold on with me. So does that clear just how tough it would be if I'm new to this field and I'm a case manager and I'm having to do exits and I look at this drop-down menu and I'm going like, what do I pick? We wind up with people in safe havens, which we don't have. We wind up with people in host homes, which we don't have. And we even have some people leaving homelessness that own their own home now in Santa Barbara. And so we know those are usually data errors. And if we send that to the provider, like, oh, no, he's definitely not owning his own home. So just want to make sure, as again, with this provider audience, that we're really working on training our staff. What is temporary, what is permanent, and what each of these things mean, so that we get the best data picture we can to make sure that we're coming at this the right way when we're talking about how to improve retention. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So again, because this is a provider audience, I won't stay here long, but I wanted you to see how the system is deciding who returns to homelessness. So in the columns with the black headers, that's the exit that said on the end date that the person had gone into permanent housing. So we think this person is permanently housed on 6/2/2019 or even 6/1/2019 in this case. But what you can see is that, you know, this first one, let's skip these first two because I think it's just a weird anomaly. But let's go to this next one. So here's an exit from Hotel de Riviera. That person was permanently housed in PSH on 11/5/2018. And one would think, right, and so this is saying again that HDR said that this was a permanent housing placement as they left HDR, like they had transitioned to another unit in theory. Yet they already show up at PATH in a cottage bed on 11/20/2018, so just 15 days later. So in theory, this data has all been cleaned by providers because this is the year-old data. I'm actually sending out to many of you this next year's data so you can really troubleshoot this. But here's the days to reappearance here in this black column. I don't know, Landon, if you can kind of show. So anything that's kind of under that 180 days, right? That's within that first 6 months that we're seeing that the person is reappearing after a permanent housing exit. It would not be uncommon, right, to have someone in and out of the shelter, but these are the people in the black column, the black headers. Those are people that the provider said were permanently housed at exit. So, so just really wanted everyone to understand how important it is that we're actually capturing the right exit so that we really have an idea how they're returning. So we'll work more with providers on this, but wanted everyone to have a real sense of how important the data is. So now we'll go to the next slide. So we are working with the state now, and they take all of our HMIS data and can come back with some really great analysis. And so what they show is that in calendar year 2020, that we had actually 14% not returning to homelessness within 2 years, but within the first 6 months, which is, would be a much higher number, right, than what you were seeing in that other data. And that there are certain populations that are either underserved or disproportionately impacted by those returns to homelessness in 6 months. One of those, the highest subgroup or subpopulation, is youth are returning to homelessness at a rate of 30% in 6 months. And we had over 100 youth that were housed. So that means 30 of our, 30 something of our 100 and something youth that we thought were permanently housed had already returned to homelessness in 6 months, which shows our youth are not getting adequate support and housing to retain that, right? Or somehow they're not getting put in the right permanent housing program for them. So one of the goals we've set to, as the continuum of care, is to reduce this by at least 10% in the next 2 years. The other group that's disproportionately impacted is 25% of persons that state they have a mental health condition are returning within the first 6 months. So again, really big number. And so we really want to make sure that we're drilling down on making sure that folks with mental health conditions are getting the support they need in housing. I've reached out to Be Well to kind of talk about the stat as well, as this is sort of the latest, the newest data here. And again, our goal would be to make sure we're at least reducing this by 10% to get it back towards closer to what the general baseline data is. So so the question, one of the questions Landon and Catherine asked me was like, who's becoming, who's returning to homelessness? And so hopefully this kind of answers at least these two populations are definitely a big piece of what's going on. So we have some other strategies in order to increase housing retention and prevent returns to homelessness. These are some of the very measurable targets that we've included in our most recent funding application that we want to achieve by June 30th, 2024. And that's that 50% of those exiting to permanent housing will remain enrolled in case management for at least 6 months as they transition. We're seeing that those who are enrolled in programs, right, go back to those bars. When people are enrolled in services, they tend to be doing much better. When we exit them as they leave the shelter, but they don't have any supportive services, those are the folks that generally seem to be returning, thus the difference between those two charts. We'd like to have a 2% reduction in returns to homelessness every 6 months in order to achieve that goal that we were looking at earlier. And then 80% of permanent housing placements will have an individualized service plan at housing entry, which will really include those connections to community networks and resources, so that when case management ends, they've really learned where they can go for help if they're not in a funded program anymore. And then of course, the exciting part is that there really are a lot of healthcare dollars that are coming for retention services. And so we're really hoping to leverage those over this next 2-year period. So again, it's good to have goals and still figure out how to do it, but hopefully these really help show some of the things that we really think will help hopefully bend the curve. Any questions? I feel like I'm talking at you. All right, then we'll go
Can
to
I ask a question, Kimberly?
Oh yeah.
I'm sorry. With this case management, these are exciting goals. With the first one, when you said that we'll remain in case management for at least 6 months, is that something that how are you providing that fiscally? Like, because that's like a big change, no?
It is. It is for, I guess people who aren't enrolled in programs. And so I think we're just at implementation now, but trying to figure out how to leverage rapid rehousing. I think some of the providers would say that there's been pressure, right, to have less amount of services, right, because you're trying to serve more people. So we really want to kind of flip that a little bit, because we know in our system, right, HUD may be saying, yes, don't overserve. And we agree with that. But what we see in our system is people are being underserved. And so really trying to make providers feel comfortable with longer enrollments. And if someone is leaving the shelter and they tell you, oh, we're so excited, we found a unit, I think traditionally it'd be like, oh, great, we can help you get some furniture. But it's like, oh, what could we connect them to give them that case management? Do they have a case manager that knows that they're transitioning? And of course, the biggest resource, Rich, to close the gap would be, leveraging what we have, like with the supportive services provision with EHV, which we're going to talk about, but leveraging these healthcare dollars. Most of our clients are SunCal members. And so, yes, we can make tweaks of education to providers to say, keep people in. They clearly need it. Get people enrolled that have a housing opportunity. That is a rapid rehousing referral, right? If you have someone in the shelter that finds a unit, they can be bumped up to be a rapid rehousing referral to make sure that they are getting supports. So some tweaks that we can do without extra money, and then definitely having to dedicate more money towards this. And one of the pots that we do have is called the permanent local housing allocation, but we would need an applicant with a housing program. Like, we'd like to have, like we've talked about this with housing authority, and they put up dollars, right, for supportive services where potentially people are getting the 6 months, but they could apply for PLHA funds to support a certain group of voucher clients. Like, there's something new called stability vouchers coming out. So we could tie permanent local housing allocation funds to those new stability vouchers to make sure that those folks have the right level of services. So definitely a need for more resources, but I think we can make some really quick changes just by really changing the way the way they're hearing the HUD language, but also really leveraging those healthcare dollars.
Awesome. Thank
and
you.
then this is just, and then the 80%, of course, is just training, right? Just really trying to widen the net. I think so often when someone goes into housing, they feel like that single case manager is the lifeline. And so we want to really create that web of support, which may be something to add to the Good Neighbor Handbook, right? Like, who else in your life can help support you in housing? Like, what do you like to do during the day? Kind of those type of things as well.
I have a question going way back to the inflow outflow chart.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm curious about the trends, especially with the orange and blue in 2019, prior to the pandemic, and all the different resources that came up out of that.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? So potentially, I mean, and I didn't do a long study, but this was when the HEAP resources were available. And so we may have seen, right, a lot of people hitting the system for the first time because we had services to reach them for the first time, right? This is the period before that is kind of that time, the first time we had that surge funding, we had the $9 million going out into the community.
Thank you, that's helpful.
But it'd be good to look at 2019. I think we haven't gone backwards. All right, and then you've heard us talk about it many times before, but the one more slide is our real sort of general goals around housing retention and preventing returns to homelessness that the continuum of care adopted in 2019. And so these are all still excellent goals, very important strategies. They just don't have those like sort of numeric measurable targets and accountability that those state goals that we just looked at show. But I did want to share them because I do really still feel like they're such a important part of this conversation. We evaluating current retention ratings practices. I mean, that's something that you're looking at today, right? Us really doing a deep dive on where things are higher, identifying barriers to housing stability, expanding eviction prevention programs, which of course this was passed in 2019, and now we've had ERAP online for over 2 years. Making sure we have those wraparound services and intensive multidisciplinary in-home case management teams. Emergency housing vouchers is really the first time that we've had that scope, right? Where we really had a large program to have a multidisciplinary team that's supporting people in housing. We have some of that in outreach, right? But housing retention, is there a risk assessment tool that could help us further? Additional training, we talked about that a little bit already. Making sure that we're identifying vulnerable people with complex needs and managing those needs and engaging house clients in meaningful activities for them. So those are some of the strategies, again, that have been adopted by the COC, but don't have those numeric goals. And then we'll go, wanted to quick go over kind of EHV. I think that's the next slide, because we do feel like this is a really promising model for services. And I think Rachel's on the call and is our EHV lead. And so maybe, Rachel, do you just want to share, like, what does it actually look like when you have the substance abuse counselor, the mental health professional, as well as the case manager, all to support a client? I don't remember where you were working prior, but how different does this feel to some of the other programs that you've experienced, and like, what does it actually look like for the client?
Yes, absolutely. It feels, what I guess the best way to describe it is, it feels like strength. Having the different team players, sometimes all at once, and it may sound a little overwhelming, but it's actually really exciting. And the folks that we're working with, they like it. They like when 2 or 3 of us are in the home, and we're able to do a screening, and we'll bring our nurse, and we're able to give them the attention that they need, and it's in their home, and they didn't have to feel like they couldn't get somewhere. We're able to meet them right where they are, and we're able to have one-on-one sessions with them, with our substance abuse counselor in home, where they don't feel like we're judging them. And then the case manager comes in with the Good Neighbor Handbook, so it is really amazing to be able to have the team all hands on deck all the time. And we're in Santa Barbara in the city, and then of course Santa Barbara County. So we're in Lompoc and Santa Maria and San Ynez, and it's amazing. So it is unlike any other program, and yeah.
So kind of the question, right? How can we do more of that, right? That, we know that EHV came with, we went out for those resources, but also, came with a lot of resources for the housing authorities, so that we didn't have to pay for X. We could we went to the COC, went to the counties. We've been asking the cities to support these supportive services in EHV. But of course, this is a group of 200 and something, or now over 300 because of it's 200 and something households. But we'd obviously love to see that kind of more intense approach across more individuals, especially those with complex needs that are moving into permanent housing. And that's kind of where I ended today. I always like to end with my little elevator pitch. I think some people say this doesn't take a prevention lens. I heard that recently. So if you don't like my quick little, very simply stated, yes, I'm not preventing homelessness with these, but housing, shelter, and services how we will end homelessness for those that are already experiencing it. And then what does our system of care need most right now? We still need rental units, right? We still have vouchers that are going unused, rapid rehousing providers that have slots available and don't have places to go. You're still having tremendous workforce impacts across all systems, but homeless service providers in particularly. So imagine if every provider had every funded staff position filled right now, how different it would be for the client in the placement support as well as the retention support, right? All of us have, every provider has program retention positions that are unfilled. And then there's a tremendous amount of money, right, to have more interim housing if we had sites that were already pre-selected. So when money drops like Home Key or the new behavioral wellness bridge housing program or the 300 million in encampment resolution funding, that will all be dependent on, do we have a place to put people and do we have sites identified? So that continues to be sort of the biggest game changers. If we had rental units, our workforce was complete and we had sites identified. So didn't want to end without sharing that again.
Thank you so
So
much, Kimberly. Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to say, I definitely wanted to, I wanted to hit you with a lot of data, like how we get here, right? What does a return to homelessness actually mean in our system? But I definitely did want it to be action oriented. So would love to talk about ways that this group can sort of not only move up the making sure that we're capturing it correctly, but also, you know, how do we actually help people maintain their unit or placement?
Hey, Kim, what's a stability voucher?
So that's the new kind of, you know, HUD keeps coming up with names. We have mainstream vouchers, we have emergency housing vouchers, we have HCV vouchers. So the latest, they just released the CPD notice, is called a stability voucher. And so those are going to be prioritized for communities that are awarded under the unsheltered NOFO. But we believe we can still be competitive sort of in the next priority group. So is Rob still on the call?
Yes, I am.
Rob, do you want to share a little bit about the new stability vouchers and what they're looking for at HUD?
Yeah, so the stability vouchers are kind of similar to the EHV vouchers in terms of the demographics of who they want to serve with those vouchers. The big difference is they're permanent. They're not time limited like the EHV vouchers. So I think I was excited when I read the notice, probably overexcited because I didn't read in big print right at the front that the first group is being targeted to rural communities, but Kimberly corrected me on that. So we do think we can be, as Kimberly said, be competitive to get some of these vouchers in the second tier, and we'll go after those to serve our communities. Is that enough?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Yes, Rick.
Yeah, Rob, I just got a question on the stability vouchers. Are they gonna be able to be used for somebody who's at risk of losing their housing, or is it just gonna be to place people who don't have any housing?
I believe it's at risk as well, from what I read. Did you read that as well, Kimberly? I think
I did take it that way. I need to go back to the notice, but similar to EHB, right, where you could serve someone that was going to potentially lose their unit, or somebody who was literally homeless.
Okay, that'd be great, because I know the County of Santa Barbara decided not to use that function on the EHV vouchers, that we weren't able to use those vouchers for somebody with housing. Where I was able to do that in SLO County, we were able to keep, 3 or 4 residents, not a lot. We were able to get them vouchers, keep them housed, but in Santa Barbara County, we weren't. So I'm hoping that, as a COC, we're looking with these new vouchers to be able to provide some housing for people who are going to become homeless, not just the ones that already are,
And Rick,
keep
maybe
that
just,
door from revolving,
yeah, just a little bit of clarification though. So we actually, our EHVs were used kind of on a 70-30 split. So 70% were literally homeless at the time of application. But we did serve the at-risk population who were people in rapid rehousing or permanent supportive housing that would lose their unit because the assistance wasn't ongoing. So we just served sounds like a different at-risk population than San Luis did. You did have to have been placed through the coordinated entry system and be enrolled in a rapid rehousing or permanent supportive housing program, because of course we needed to save those folks who we had placed first. But we did use EHVs for at-risk, but it was for that targeted group.
Okay, well, that was good to know. That's not the way it was explained to me. Are those vouchers still out there, or are we done with EHV vouchers?
We did receive more EHV vouchers. Emily, you want to give a status on referrals?
Let's see, I think I'm unmuted. Yes. We've made a number of referrals. Both housing authorities are close to being at 80% utilization for the newest referrals we've made. We are waiting for some of those referrals to move through the process to see if those folks can utilize that opportunity. We may be making additional referrals, and we are, as we were previously, looking at people who are highly prioritized and unhoused, and rapid rehousing and permanent supportive housing providers are also giving me client IDs of clients who were housed through coordinated entry, who are at risk of returning to homelessness, and we're case conferencing and looking at different factors, to identify those folks. And we're hoping, we did see a notice that there would be additional reallocations of emergency housing vouchers. So we're always hopeful that we'll get more.
Yeah,
that notice just came out as well. Sorry, Rob, go ahead.
Yeah, that'll be reallocations for vouchers, agencies that have 0% utilization on their program first. That's what they're looking at first. So luckily, both the county housing authority, our housing authority, and San Luis, they all are really high up there on their utilization and are held up nationwide as an example of partnership with the COC and with community partners and making it work.
So I think with this working group for future working groups, just in terms of action items, I'll work with Lucille and Catherine on future agendas that we'll want to prioritize having the follow-up conversation about how all of our on the ground case managers and outreach staff are marking exits to permanent housing. And then I'll also just be curious to be able to share updates from the conversations with the other counties about how they're tracking that data as well, to see what we can learn from them. I don't know if there's anything, Kim, that you want to add. Yeah.
Well, Landon, I was wondering if you guys might take on or the group take on that we kind of come up with some of those community resources that could be supporting individuals sort of outside of homeless services that, people new to our community or new to case management could have we don't need another sort of resource guide, but something very specific about when someone moves into housing, what types of resources may be important to surround them with, and like what those are in each area, or particularly maybe the city of Santa Barbara, since I know that's the focus of your efforts. So, where the AA meetings are, and different things like that, how we go about accessing mental health, substance abuse treatment. I feel like, many case managers are trained, but there's just so many different, I was thinking of like the mental wellness center, like what days they're open, just putting something together like that to where case managers would really have it at their fingertips to expand that, that reach of who's supporting the client in housing.
And I think along that, we discussed and planning this meeting of bringing up individual service plans and potentially kind of creating one for specific post housing. I had drafted something, but with all of the discussion that was happening today, we didn't get to it, which is okay. So now we have something to work on next meeting. But yeah, just getting feedback about what that looks like, and if we can come to an agreement of, is this the individual service plan template that we as a county, as a system, can use, and kind of have those best practices in place. Because as we know, the individualized service plan that happens pre-housing is going to be very different than when they get housed. Those needs are going to look a lot different. And so if we can have a more robust ISP to help case managers navigate that transition with the client, then I think that'll speak to the client being more successful in their unit. So that's definitely something that we're going to be working on in the next meeting.
And we are at the hour right now. So I just want to say thank you again, Kimberly, and everyone for being here with us. We'll have a lot to follow up on with this conversation. So the next Housing Retention Working Group meeting will be on the 26th of September at 11 a.m. And we'll send out a reminder email as that gets closer. So thank you all.
Thank you, everyone.